6 campus and in West Caldwell, and it's a pleasure to be here tonight, and I want to thank everybody, but I think the presentation needs to go on, so we'll do that. How did I arrive at this great title, right? Understanding affordability, and especially community college affordability and its impact on student persistence. Well, it really started out with me looking at outcomes and success. I was promoted and became a credit dean. I had been in non-credit doing workforce development for a number of years. I knew what worked in our adult programs, and I wanted to see why things were different in credit. You know, everyone kept saying credit students are different than non-credit students, and my experience is people are people. You know, anyone's going to be, whether they're credit or non-credit, they're a student. They're trying to work at their education. So I started looking at student success, reading Tinto and reading Bean and reading about retention and how do we keep them and what do we do with them. And then I started coming across the studies on all the barriers, and then eventually started to see that finances was coming up. So that's how I arrived at this. Of course, I arrived at this with many conversations with Dr. Rose and even Dr. Crable, because I didn't know where to go. But one of the things they said is work on your weakness, and I felt that I needed to understand how we became a community college and how do we get funded, how do we exist. So I started looking and reading. It was like 6 pages of references, not in my slides. If you'd like them, I can send them to you. But started saying that the students themselves said finances was that was the #1 reason. That's what they identified themselves with. You know, they could say transportation, it could be the students that had students that are coming to community colleges have multiple obligations. They're trying to have a family, they're working, they're coming to school. Even if they're coming as a traditional age student, they're still coping with living at home and trying to figure out themselves and what they want. So I started reading about tuition, and I started looking at what were the trends, and I found out that there's a whole lot of information on tuition in terms of like debt. You know, $50 million worth of student debt over the last decade. It's like, ugh, you know, and it looks like it's gonna double within the next decade. I said, ugh, we don't want to do that. So where do we go from here? But there wasn't a lot of studies on community college and persistence, and there are not a lot of studies on community college and money and finances for students. So I started to kind of look at our history, and we evolved somewhere between 1944 with the GI Bill and the Servicemen's Readjustment Act. Some of the community colleges, you could see some that are 70 or 80 years old, like Union County College, that's been around for a really long time. But the majority of them really started to emerge after Truman's Commission report, and that's when we saw community colleges starting to grow. And it was reaching the public in a different way, reaching the public that were coming back, servicemen that were coming back, women that were re-entering the workforce. So that really became kind of interesting. And with the reauthorization of the Higher Education Act, we started to see a lot of movements from grant aid to loan aid. So that accounts for some of the debt. People started to have to take more loans out in order to keep up with their studies. Then I started to look at our budgets, and Cohen and Brower really talked about in their book about the split. And I took what they wrote in text and I made it into a graph, because we really need to understand that we're spending most of our money, which we all know, and you guys know better than anyone else. 80% or so of your budget is going to pay the personnel. The professors need to be paid. We don't make widgets. We don't have these things. We have to pay people to teach. So our money is going into instruction, into administration, into benefits, a little bit into student services, and the rest of it is kind of maintaining the buildings that we have. But 84% could be what you're paying every year, you know, to just maintain the level of services that you have to do for the students that are coming in for service. Then I looked at my case study, and I looked at the institution that I was studying, and I saw that where was the money coming for the budget? If you have a $60 million budget, you know, 36 million or so of it was actually coming from student tuition and fees. Now, student pays tuition through out-of-pocket, through loans, through Pell Grants, tags, financial aid, multiple ways that they're paying. But that means we're tapping the students. And in New Jersey, we're supposed to have this tripartite, you know, county, state, and tuition. Well, it's really off kilter, and students are really paying the bulk of it. Most of our tuition, we're becoming almost like the private private colleges, because we're tapping them to pay for their bills. And some of it is coming from grants and foundations, if you have an aggressive foundation or if you have workforce development that's happening within your organizations, then that'll bring in some money. You know, that's what was happening at the institution that I studied. We have a big percentage coming in from workforce development, JTPA and that kind of background. But then we have the county and the state, and we're sort of all competing for the state, all of us, depending on our enrollment, and then the county depends on how they're figuring out their budget. So the way it's looked, we've had level funding now for a couple of years, and we keep passing on the cost to the students. Then I looked at all of our institutional websites, and just to, this was just more for today than my dissertation, but at the encouragement from Larry. But I looked at the websites, and we're charging between $85 to $110 per credit. Okay, and that's, sort of the highest, 110, 100, maybe 112. And then most of us are sort of in the middle, around the $100 per credit. But then we're tacking on fees. We're tacking on a lot of fees. One institution actually does 24% of the total tuition bill. So that was interesting because they did a percentage, and everybody else pretty much had a certain amount for technology, for student activities, for general fees. If your students are in nursing or allied health, we were really going to, give it to them a little bit more. You're going to charge them a little bit more because they have to do all these allied health and laboratory experiments and things to prepare them to be in the allied health field. So we're pushing we're pushing our budgets onto them. They're paying in order to come to college. So I became interested in finding out how else were they paying. So FAFSA, we know that they have to apply for it, and a lot of students actually don't apply. When I was interviewing, a lot of the students that I interviewed didn't apply for FAFSA. They didn't think they were going to qualify, so they basically were a little bit, should I apply, should I not apply? I was telling them you should apply regardless, But as an example, I had a young woman who came in my office, and she told me she had applied, she received nothing, 29 years old, 2 kids, $29,000 is what she's making. She couldn't really get any help to come to the community college, and that's $1,800 or so that we're charging for, a 12, 15 credit load, So then when I was interviewing the students, I did, I did a case study, but it was really qualitative, and then I did this thing called grounded theory. Grounded theory means nobody else is really out there doing this. Made me a little bit nervous to talk about a topic that nobody's talked to, but I guess I gotta kind of somebody forge ahead, But I interviewed 18 really in-depth interview the students, but I also interviewed staff, and I also interviewed the controller, and I interviewed parents. So I was really getting a really wide 360-degree look at the topic. But students are really comparing us, the community college, to the local schools that are either private or public. So they're saying we're affordable because they're comparing us to them. But then when you ask them, are we really affordable, they start talking about the challenges of paying for books, the challenges of coming to school, of paying for a sitter, of figuring out how to take the bus or pay for a car to be there. They're really talking about that. So even though we're affordable, when they start talking about it and we start asking them questions, they're struggling. They're really struggling. And the ones that I interviewed, the 18, I was really looking at the group that is paying for themselves. So I went through our payment plan at the college, and I pulled people who had been in the payment plan, they had committed to it, and they may not have made the first payment, but not the second payment. So I was trying to get at them what was going on as to why they weren't making the payments. So they came up with this. They said they really spoke about the fees. They really spoke a lot about the books. They really said that they couldn't understand sometimes the payment policy. They couldn't understand when the dates were due sometimes, or how they could get on the website to pay. Then they talked to me about all the other issues that come with paying at the bookstore and all this other stuff that really wasn't irrelevant. But they did say that they're really struggling in order to come up with those $2,000, and the books can cost them $700 or $800 on top of our $1,500 or $1,800. So they're really struggling to come up with a $5,000 or $6,000 a year to be full time, and that they spoke to over and over and over. The other thing is that I was looking, why did they get into it? And a lot of them, they didn't want to commit to a loan. And I was like, well, why not? You could take a loan for $2,000 and maybe it will get you through, maybe a little faster. But some of them have debt from attending other schools. And that we don't really delve into too much. But they really may already owe for going to like a dental assistant school or some other private school. So they spoke about that. The few who didn't have loans, they don't want the loans. They don't want the loans. They figured if they can get through community college, they'll pick up a loan for their bachelor's or their master's, but not for the community college. They feel that they want to be able to afford it. They also, some of them did not qualify for the FAFSA. They just said it. I applied and I couldn't get it, so I had to go on. They don't have the savings to be able to pay. We're talking about the middle class, the lower middle class, because in order to get FAFSA, you really have to be pretty poor to be able to qualify and to get assistance. And if you have the kind of money where you can lay out the money, then I didn't get at those people. I was getting at the individuals who are struggling to come up with the $1,800, and this is what they were saying. They were working significant amount of hours in order to be able to pay the semester. So if they were working 40 hours and trying to do full load, didn't seem to work. And then they were trying to use the installment plan because they needed to stay on it and to persist. And some of them didn't know about scholarships. They didn't think they would qualify for a scholarship. So that was parents also spoke about using the payment plan because it allowed them to pay little by little to see if they could help their son or daughter make it through. Sometimes we're also late. Within our institution, also, I had a couple students that I interviewed, and they basically used the payment plan because they made a payment to hold their schedule while they figured out whether the Pell or the tag was going to come in or whether their employer was also going to kick in. So they used the payment plan. We really needed, though, that plan. They can buy a class load. Some of them work 40 hours and they only want to buy two classes, 6 credits. They can do that. They're juggling their multiple responsibilities, and this helped them. And the payment plan really made a significance for those that were really willing to push, to persist at their own pace. And it also allowed them to earn the money while they could keep going, because they're paying this semester and trying to come up with the money between now and like Christmas to then pay for their spring semester and to go on. And out of all of the information that I got, I've made some changes within my the small campus, and what I learned was one of the things is that the advisors must talk about payment plans when they're advising, not just to academic advisement, but say to the students, this is going to cost you this much. So even having a sheet on the desk that displayed the amount of tuition that it would take, that was there to explain the fees, having it be visible actually helped some students to make a difference between whether they were going to take 12 credits or 6 credits and take what they could afford to keep going and going at it in small increments. I also think that our communication policies within the college have to permeate through all the levels. So it's really about creating a culture of engagement and creating a situation where you have students that are learning from the point they come in that here, this is the policy on payment, this is what you need to do, these are the next things that you would need to do in order to stay here. And then making information about scholarships or other available things also through the website, or just having that conversation when they're coming into advisement. The interesting thing when I was working with the advisors is, of course, they say that's not my job. They're like, I'm only supposed to be talking about academic advisement. I said, yes, but if you're spending half an hour with a student talking about academic advisement, and then they leave your office, they go down to the bursar, and they, to register, and then they print out a schedule, and at the bottom it says their bill, and it says $2,000, and they don't have it, they're gonna walk out the door, and you're not gonna see them, and then you've done nothing for that, you wasted that half hour. So it was a lot of conversations about learning how to create a culture within the college to make students aware that, yes, they have to be responsible for their bills, and yes, maybe you should buy only what you can, and how do you go from there? So I think it really made a difference with some of the things that we've talked about. They're also getting to be really savvy consumers. We have an economic downturn going on right now, and so they're holding their money in their hand going, okay, I want to go to school because I need to get that better job, and I need to go to the next level or improve my career, but how can I do this? So when they're coming in, they're saying, I'm paying for my education, so I demand a good instruction within the classroom, and they're beginning to make some demands. So if we continue to place the burden of our budgets on them, then in turn we have to be able to deliver.